Okay, let's get right into it. There's a new report making the rounds that paints an absolutely explosive picture of what's happening between Iran and Israel. We're talking about claims of direct military strikes, high-stakes retaliation, a full-blown showdown. So we're going to walk through this specific narrative claim by claim, and it's a story of chaos, revenge, and a region right on the very brink. So the whole story this source tells kicks off with one central explosive event, an alleged strike against a key Iranian figure. From that single point, the narrative just spirals, describing this massive counterattack that, according to this report, has thrown Israel into total disarray, and even left its leadership missing in action. And to really sell this idea of a terrified population, this source uses the pretty inflammatory phrase you see right here. This is the kind of language it uses to set the stage for what it claims was a huge, incredibly fast, and terrifying response, framing the whole thing as an act designed specifically to create fear. All right, so the linchpin for this entire story is a pretty dramatic and, I have to say, completely unverified claim. The report alleges that this whole crisis was triggered by the so-called martyrdom of Ali Khamenei after an attack on his compound. So let's break down how the source builds its entire case from this one foundational claim. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. It's all about how the source frames this idea of martyrdom. As you can see, it's not presented as a loss at all. Instead, it's a catalyst. It's a transformation into this immortal symbol that, in this telling of events, justifies absolute and never-ending retaliation. So, let's get to the supposed retaliation. The source goes into incredible detail about what it calls a direct and devastating counterattack. It claims that some very precise intelligence led to a direct hit on an extremely sensitive Israeli target. And this slide really lays out the whole an eye for an eye logic the source is pushing. The narrative draws a direct parallel. Just as a meeting was supposedly hit in Iran, a missile strike, it claims, precisely targeted a high-level meeting inside Israel's Ministry of Defense. The whole story is framed as a direct hit for a hit. And to really hammer home just how effective this supposed attack was, the report makes another huge claim, that Israel's famous Iron Dome system completely failed. The narrative insists these missiles were just unstoppable, and that they destroyed what it calls one of the most important buildings in the entire Israeli defense network. So, after describing this devastating attack, the source shifts gears and focuses on the alleged chaos happening inside Israel. And it builds this part of the story around the supposed disappearance of one very, very high-profile person. Yeah, the report poses this dramatic question, claiming the Israeli Prime Minister hasn't been seen at all since the strike on the defense ministry. It even starts to speculate, was he injured or worse? The whole point is to suggest his disappearance is a sign of just how bad the attack really was. Now, to back up this claim of widespread chaos, the source points to these specific things it says are happening on the ground. It talks about a total media blackout around the attack site, phones of civilians being confiscated, people being ordered into bunkers, basically painting a picture of a government desperately trying to control a crisis that's spiraling out of control. Then, the narrative brings in this really powerful symbol to argue that this whole thing is far from over. The source highlights the alleged raising of the red flag of war in Iran. And this flag, as the source material explains it, carries some serious weight. It's presented as this huge cultural and ideological declaration, a signal that the conflict has entered a totally new phase of commitment, where revenge is literally the only goal. The story really emphasizes that the resolve here is absolute. It frames the Iranian response not as just another military strike, but as the start of an existential fight to the end, one that's fueled by a belief system that, it says, has no fear of death. And from there, the report zooms out. It argues that the strike on Haifa, well, that was just stage one. It's predicting a much, much larger conflict that is all set to expand. So what's next? Well, the source lays out what it sees as a very clear two-step plan for escalation. It's claiming that these attacks on land-based targets are just the beginning, and that very soon the conflict is going to expand from land to sea, which would widen the whole theater of war in a big way. And this is a really crucial point in the narrative, how it separates the targets. It's basically saying that yes, a score has now been settled with Israel, but the confrontation with the United States, that hasn't even started yet. It's framed as this future reckoning that could be even bigger. And so that's the story this particular source is putting out there. The core message is that all these events it describes, they aren't the end. They're just the opening salvo in a much larger conflict. The whole narrative is built to leave you with one single takeaway, that more escalation isn't a question of if, but when. It's a powerful story for sure, and understanding how these narratives get constructed is so key to figuring out the complex information coming out of the region.